Hello and welcome to the Raw podcast brought to you by the Sunderland Echo. We're back for another preview podcast, and today we're going to be looking ahead to Sunderland's championship match against Norwich at the Stadium of Light on Saturday. So to preview the game, joining myself, Joe Nicholson, we are joined by Norwich reporter Adam Harvey from the Pink Un. Adam, plenty to talk about heading into Saturday's match following the midweek fixtures. Have to say it's two teams coming in not in great form. Sunderland, 3 defeats in a row. You could say they were a bit unlucky with Dan Neil's red card against Middlesbrough, and they gave a good account of themselves against Leicester. At Norwich, it's 4 games without a win now following a 2-1 defeat against Middlesbrough in midweek. So what is the mood like at Carrow Road?
Yeah, it's quite low at the moment, to be honest. It's one of them where the start of the season was ultra positive and everyone kind of felt like it was a little bit of a surprise, I'd say, given that the way that last season the last 11 games of last season transpired. It's really disappointing, and kind of to come into the season and being amongst the top teams after sort of 5-6 games, and it felt like everything was really good. And then they got a couple of injuries, and since then it's been a bit of a slog, to be honest. The last couple of games at Carrow, they were 2-0 up against Leeds on Saturday, and particularly given it was against Daniel Farke, who is a well-loved manager as well at Norwich. I think that moment it felt like it was sort of getting back to positivity and everything was great, and then they concede 3 pretty poor goals, well taken goals by Leeds, but poor goals from a Norwich City defensive standpoint, and that was a bit of a blow. But Tuesday night's defeat against Middlesbrough, the performance was so below par. It's probably the worst of the season so far. And kind of the pressure that was on David Wagner before the game really got kind of amplified after the final whistle. There was sort of a few cries of Wagner out, and it's kind of turning a little bit sour. And I think Norwich fans are maybe a little bit they're in a bit of a rut. They don't really know where their football club's going and the direction of the club at the moment. So it's a difficult place to be at the moment if you're associated with Norwich City.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned it was a positive start. I think they won 4 of their first 6 league games, so they were in good form. And then since then, it's just 2 wins in their last 9. So what has kind of maybe changed, or what started going wrong for Norwich that's put them in this bad run of form?
They were winning at Huddersfield, and they lost Josh Sargent, who was really kicked on this season. I mean, last season, we saw it actually before the World Cup. He was excellent last year, and then went off to the World Cup with America and he played some games out there. Didn't really come back quite the same player, but he was always kind of in the shadows of Timu Pukki, who's, everyone knows at this level was just scoring goals for fun, and he found it difficult to get in the team. He kind of got pushed more out wide by Dean Smith. When David Wagner arrived, it was very much you're going to be the focal point of this team, and he started the season really well. I think it was 3 goals in his first 4 games, and everyone felt like he was kind of hitting the form that they needed. They brought in Ashley Barnes as well, who everyone will know from his time at Burnley, and he also sort of hit the ground running, 2 goals as well in sort of the first few matches. And him and Sargent had kind of struck a really good relationship together. And they lose Sargent against Huddersfield. They then lose against Rotherham. They then have a home game against Leicester, which, to be fair, they played well in. And then they lost Ashley Barnes to injury as well, both of which are quite long term. I think Barnes is due back in a few weeks now, but he's sort of been missing now for over a month. And Sargent's around the Christmas time. And since then, it's just not really clicked for them. Adam Ida's kind of the reserve striker, I suppose, to those two, and came through the Norwich Academy, never really had a sort of decent run of games, and this has been his chance, and he's not really taken it. I think the system that David Wagner sort of plays doesn't really play to his strengths, so it's been a really kind of difficult spell. They're giving away really cheap goals, and the performance levels are nowhere near where they were at the start of the season. At the start of the season, it felt like everything was there for them. You kind of look at the bench, and the quality off the bench at the moment is sort of nowhere near as good as what's in the starting 11. So that makes it difficult for David Wagner when things aren't going right. He can't really change it up due to the injury situation. So I'd say injuries are pretty key, but also David Wagner's sort of tactical in-game management at the moment seems to be under the sort of microscope of criticism. Just at times, some of the substitutions he's making seem to be killing us, and defensive errors and mistakes are creeping in quite regularly. So, yeah, it's been a difficult kind of month or so, and it's one of them where we've got a new sporting director coming in. We're kind of waiting for his arrival for things to kind of change.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned those defensive errors, and just looking at the championship table, Norwich have conceded the joint highest amount of goals in the championship, along with QPR, with conceding 24 goals. Now, Sunderland fans may look at Norwich's bench and see Danny Bart, who was Sunderland's player of the season last season. Hasn't made a start yet since he joined Norwich. He's had a few late appearances off the bench. So why hasn't he been starting, and why hasn't he been brought into the team?
Yeah, I think obviously he arrived off the back of Norwich selling Andrew Omobamidele to Nottingham Forest on deadline day. So it was one of them where they needed cover in that position because Grant Hanley's sort of out till the new year, quite a bad injury sort of back in March time. So he's not been available. So they needed cover. And it felt like with Danny Batth, an experienced player, of course, a well-loved character from his time at Sunderland, a man who actually was excelling in a pretty good Sunderland team last year by all accounts. So I think when he arrived, it was like a really good, good experienced player to sort of have in reserve to already two quite experienced players in the Championship in Ben Gibson and Shane Duffy, a new arrival as well. I just think it's kind of, for David Wagner, he likes a settled side and he tends to stick with it. I mean, he also likes to have kind of Ben Gibson's left-footed and Shane Duffy's right-footed. He's very much, I want the defenders with the sort of right foot in sort of said positions, and he's just stuck with his guns. I just think as well, the situation they're in, I think Grant Hanley's sort of sooner coming back than maybe expected. So for Danny Batth, it's probably a really frustrating situation to be in because he's not getting any minutes or any sort of look in the team, and in a team that's conceding a lot of cheap goals. Ben Gibson headed into his own net against Coventry. Shane Duffy's been susceptible to a few mistakes. I think a lot of Norwich fans are crying out for Danny Batth to get an opportunity, but for whatever reason in David Wagner's mind, it's whether it's something he's seen in training or whatever. Obviously, we're not privy to see that, but I just think there must be something or some reason why he's not playing him, which is a strange one because from everything we've heard from the Sunderland end, he's a well-loved man up there.
Mm-hmm. Another issue they've had at the back is goalkeeper Angus Gunn was ruled out of the last game, wasn't he, against Middlesbrough, and it looks like he's not going to be available for this game either. How big a loss will he be? And you mentioned a few injuries with Sargent and Barnes. What is the latest on injuries heading into this game?
Yeah, we'll be speaking to Dave Wagner in the morning, but in terms of Angus Gunn, he's been ruled out until the November international break, which is a huge blow because he's kind of one of these, again, he's been given his opportunity off the back of Tim Krul's departure in the summer. He's finally got his opportunity to be the number one in following the footsteps of his father, who's a legend at the football club. And to be fair, he started the season quite well. Albeit, you look at the goals they've been shipping, a lot of them haven't really been his fault. He's probably kept them in games at different points. It's been more those defensive errors more than his personal errors that have cost them. Thankfully, they brought in an experienced Championship backup goalkeeper in the form of George Long from Millwall in the transfer window that's just gone, and he's made a few appearances in the Carrow Cup already this season, so he's kind of got a few minutes under the belt already. He came on in the game where Angus went off against Leeds and started as well on Tuesday night. And to be fair to him, maybe the second goal, he could put a little bit of fault at his door positionally, maybe not in the right position. But I think, again, it's one of them where the defence stepped off the man and allowed the opportunity to come in. So I think he was sturdy, pretty, as you'd expect from a well-operated Championship goalkeeper, just very solid in goal. But given the levels between him and Angus Gunn, who's an international now for Scotland, it's quite a big drop off, and that's kind of been the problem that I spoke about. Just in one of the previous answers there, the drop off between what's a starting player and kind of someone on the bench for Norwich is quite vast, maybe compared to the likes of what Leicester can do or what Leeds can do or what Southampton can do. Where if you get one player injured, you've got a similar quality player that you can bring in and slot in.
Mm-hmm. We spoke about how at the start of the season it was clicking for Norwich and they had some good results. So clearly there are some capable players in that squad. So who are the key players that Sunderland will have to keep an eye on at the Stadium of Light on Saturday?
Yeah, there's probably two, I'd say. One is Gabriel Sara, who's a Brazilian midfielder who arrived last summer for around about £6 million from Sao Paulo and struggled to adapt initially under Dean Smith, never really got an opportunity. I think there was kind of the language barrier as well. He didn't speak English at that point, and he sort of made an effort to go and learn English. And I think by the January time, he was basically fluent. And that was when David Wagner arrived, and it kind of felt like that was what he needed. I think ironically, he has two dogs that were in Brazil, and they've also arrived in England around the January time. And it just felt like that kind feeling, I suppose, of home was maybe what he needed just to adapt. And at the end of last season, he absolutely flourished in this team, scoring goals, assists, just his ability on the ball. I mean, there was a pass as well on Tuesday night against Middlesbrough, which is just, that's a Premier League quality player in a side that's struggling in the Championship, just a level above. He won the August Player of the Month for the Championship as well. He really seriously is a talented player, and he's a joy to watch. And I think he's one that we all know that if Norwich are not back in the Premier League by next season, then he's probably not going to be a Norwich City player anymore, but he'll get a good transfer fee, which is kind of, given the sort of self-funding model that Norwich operate under, is quite crucial. And then the other one is sort of in his breakout season. It's Jonathan Rowe, who came through the Norwich City Academy. He actually made some appearances for us in the Premier League a few years ago, but then he had a really sort of bad couple of injuries last season that meant he never really sort of broke into the team due to kind of just, not being available more than anything. He had a few appearances off the bench at the end of last season, but had a really positive pre-season. David Wagner trusted him from the start. Had a few injuries actually as well. Borja Sainz is another wing we brought in. He was injured at the start of the season, which kind of gave Jonathan Rowe his opportunity, and he's taken it. I think it's now 7 goals already this campaign. Just got himself in the England under-21 setup, scored in that 9-1 win that England under-21s had the other night. So it just feels like for him, it's kind of playing with freedom in a team that's struggling, and he's the one that's maybe carrying them over the line at different points. Without him, I think it could have been a very different situation already this season. Maybe Norwich are further down the table than where they currently are. So they're the two I'd say. If those two are fit and firing, then Norwich do have a threat going forwards. If they're not on their game, then generally speaking, the whole team just really, really struggles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Rowe on 7 league goals this season for Norwich. The only player that's got more than him in the Championship is actually Jack Clarke at Sunderland. So 2 exciting young players to keep an eye on Saturday. How will they set up? What formation do they go with? How does Wagner set his team up, and what's his kind of style of play?
He tends to go for a 4-2-3-1, although it can be quite fluid at times in that more when he had Barnes and Sargent, he kind of could make it more of a 4-4-2 if they needed to. Due to the fact they've only really started with one striker now, it does tend to stay more as a 4-2-3-1. The approach is very much let the opposition have the ball and we'll try to pick you off and hit you on the counter with kind of the likes of Rose, Sarah, Onel Hernandez, all quite quick players. So in transition, Norwich tend to be quite good. They'll pick the ball up and they can counter quite quickly, and that's probably the way that they look to try and punish teams. The biggest concern is tactically is where if Sunderland can sort of break the 2 in the midfield defensively, Norwich look all over the shop. So as soon as you get past McLean and Sarri, the spaces really do open, and you have an opportunity to exploit what has been, it is joint worst defensive record in the Championship. So there's a few concerns, I think, as well, like the in-game management from a Norwich fan perspective at the moment is heavily criticised in David Wagner's corner, in the way that sometimes he makes substitutions at times which maybe don't necessarily need to make substitutions. I think on Saturday against Leeds, it felt like everything was flowing nicely. He kind of felt that maybe they needed some fresh legs in the wide areas, and from that moment on, it all went wrong again. So I think that's something to sort of, I suppose, bear in mind on Saturday. If the game's going in a said way, and then Norwich are maybe chucking on almost players just for the sake of it, which is kind of how it's felt in recent games, then that might be the moment late in the game where Sunderland can probably do what a lot of teams have been doing at the moment, and that's get the goal that you need to win the game. So that's the way they'll set up. In terms of the 11, I think I could see it being a few more changes. The likes of Adam Forshaw, who was formerly at Middlesbrough and Leeds, I could see him coming into the midfield just to try and shore it up a little bit on Saturday. And Borja Sainz, I referenced, is a player they brought in from the Turkish league in the summer, and he's finally now fully fit. So I could see him potentially making a sort of first start in the Championship on Saturday, and intrigued to see how he goes with it, because for me, he can't really settle with the same 11 that's been so poor in the last couple of games.
Have you seen much of Sunderland this season, and how do you think the two sides will match up on Saturday?
Yeah, I've caught a couple of games on the TV, as you do, and I think from what I've seen and from afar, that really good run where was it 6 wins in 8 and a draw as well, I think, in that run, and that felt like maybe the Sunderland at the end of last season, which was just going to sort of keep the momentum going, and lots of young attacking players that really exciting. I think if you can keep hold of and build off, then there's a really great foundation for Sunderland to really kick on, which is something that I think Norwich done. You look sort of back into 2018-19, lots of young talent, the likes of Cantwell, Max Aarons, Ben Godfrey, Jamal Lewis, all ripped up the Championship, and it kind of has a similar feel, I suppose, about that for Sunderland. But given maybe from afar, just looking at the team, a lack of experience potentially, which is something that I felt Norwich lacked last season. They've kind of gone the other route and brought in far too many experienced players, and they just feel a little bit tired this season. Where I think maybe if Sunderland had a couple more players, the likes of maybe even a Danny Bart, then maybe that could be key. But just sort of in those moments in games where maybe that they need that leader to kind of get everyone and group them together, then that would probably be what my take. Obviously, I'm not privy to the camp that you're in, but just looking at from afar and games I've seen, then that would be my assessment.
Yeah, Sunderland have conceded 2 goals from set pieces in the last 2 games. So Danny Bart maybe someone that would have been useful in there with his height and his aerial presence. But you've mentioned how you think Norwich will set up. Sunderland have tended to struggle this season and last season when teams have come to the Stadium of Light, sat quite deep and posed a threat on the counter-attack, which you say Norwich are quite good in transition. So do you think Norwich will come to the Stadium of Light and concede possession and then be happy to try and hit Sunderland on the counter-attack?
Yeah, that's tended to be the approach. I mean, they've actually struggled more on the road this season than they have at home, despite kind of playing a similar way. It feels like maybe at home they can, I think probably just almost that home crowd edge that they have. We're on the road, maybe when sort of they go and concede a goal and the home crowd, on their opposition team's side, it feels like Norwich really struggle to sort of, I suppose, overcome that element. And just I think it's 1 win on the road so far this season in the league, and that was at Huddersfield back in August. So it's been a bit of a difficult spell. I think they haven't lost at the Stadium of Light since 2012, which is, I know these statistics are always there to be broken, but that's maybe one that I'm looking at in favour of Norwich this upcoming weekend. But yeah, I think if Sunderland do, happy to have the ball, then Norwich, happily will try and pick them off, and use the likes of Rowe and Sarah to try and, to their own advantage, I suppose. And Sarah's, he knows where the net is from distance as well, which is, something that if teams will back off him, then he's happy to shoot from anywhere, and he tends to find the corner of the net. So they're the danger men. That could be the key. If Sunderland particularly struggle against that system, then maybe Norwich will get some unexpected joy, I suppose, on Saturday.
Mm-hmm. Well, just finally, Adam, we usually finish by just asking our guests for a quick score prediction. How do you think the game is going to go between Sunderland and Norwich on Saturday?
Yeah, I think my head says it's going to be a draw. Just 2 teams that really desperately need a win, that are going to cancel each other out and probably not really help their own situations as they both look for, to get back in amongst the playoff mix and, sort of kick on, I suppose, in these last 2 games then before the November break again. I could see a 1-1. I think Sunderland might get an early goal, but I do fancy Norwich with the attacking threat. And as you've already outlined there, maybe Sunderland struggling against teams that can hit them on the counter. I think Norwich are probably one of the better teams in the league at doing that. But again, it's just crucial that Norwich don't make too many defensive errors, because that's been a common theme so far in recent games again. So if they make one of them, then I could probably see it swinging more in the Sunderland favour if there's going to be a winner.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, big game for both teams after both lost in midweek. I think I'll go for 2-1 Sunderland win as they look to get back to winning ways. They've lost 3 in a row, but I don't think the performances have necessarily been too bad. Did well against Leicester on Tuesday, side that are seemingly beating everybody at the minute. So I'll go for 2-1 win, but Norwich, as you mentioned, clearly have a lot of attacking threat as well. But Adam, thanks a lot for joining us on the latest episode of the Raw podcast. If you like what we do here at the Raw podcast, please consider subscribing on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts and leaving a review. And for all the latest SAFC news, you can head over to the SAFC section of the Sunderland Echo website. You can find the thoughts of head coach Tony Mowbray, and we'll have more build-up to Saturday's match against Norwich. We'll also have live updates and analysis from the Stadium of Light as Sunderland take on Norwich on Saturday, as well as post-match reaction and analysis. Once again, thanks a lot for listening to the Raw podcast.